Was really good reporting what was going on in District 15, and just has been a great member of the Seattle group, and I appreciate him. So I just want to say, direct from his starring role at the International Convention in Vancouver, British Columbia. Welcome, Steve.
Okay, Steve Alcoholic. And what an honor to be asked to speak at our 4th anniversary celebration for dinner. We had Ralph B. Opened this meeting by speaking, and then he spoke again at the 2nd at our 1st anniversary, so 2 times in a row. And then we didn't want him to get all proud of himself, so then Austri spoke. And then Lara, and here we go. So my sobriety date is August 14th, 1986, but I'm going to start my story a little bit before that. I'm sharing something I've never shared at a talk before now. When I was a little kid, I forgot about this till recently. I wanted to be a good person. I really did, but I didn't know how. I was a screw up in grade school and in high school. I was in trouble all the time, and it was really tough for me in the beginning to get into trouble because I've got 6 brothers and 2 sisters, so there's 9 of us all in a row, and my parents cared a lot for us. All my dad wanted was to raise children that had integrity. And that was the role model I grew up under. So nobody taught me. I had to figure out how to be bad all by myself and with some friends. Other people at the podium, they talk about these horrible childhoods, hideous ones. And I'm thinking they got it easy. They knew how to be bad. But at any rate, one event happened when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. We moved from Tacoma to Seattle when I was 3. And as I promised Jeffrey, who's in the audience tonight, I would never say anything disparaging about Tacoma. So we get this big house on Capitol Hill, and I'm out in the backyard, and they had these bushes there that had berries on them. Turned out later it was deadly nightshade. So I was rushed to the hospital, and we're new at the house. And I have very little memory of that happening, except years later, I was hiking in the woods or something, and we found some more berries. And the odor, it brought back the memory. And a point I want to make now is I never ate those berries again. I got sick, almost died, never ate them again. And later on, I don't know, 4th, 5th grade or something, I opened up the refrigerator and I took a carton of milk out. And Mom wasn't in the kitchen, so we could drink out of the carton. Took a big swig and actually swallowed something. It was sour. How you have sour milk in a refrigerator with 9 kids, I don't know. But it really affected me. I've never had a sip of sour milk since. Okay. When I was about 14, I was active in CYO, and CYO ran summer camps. And I was a dishwasher at this girls' summer camp. And part of the ritual of that was that they had a chaplain at the summer camp. And at one point during each session, the girls would all go out for an overnight camp. And the chaplain would take the 2 dishwashers, of which I was one, out to dinner at Snoqualmie Falls. It was kind of a ritual deal there. Well, when we got back from dinner, he got out a fifth of whiskey, and he said, "Come on, boys, uh, let's see what you can do." And I felt like such a grown up and stuff. And we drained that bottle. But at the time, to be fair, because it was a different era and stuff, his purpose was to get us sick on alcohol, and then we'd never touch it again. That was his purpose. And we got sick. Boy, did we get sick. And the next morning, when I woke up on the floor, vomit and all whatever else came out of me that night. And the guy that was with me, he came in with that. There's a little bit left in the fifth. And he said, do you boys want to finish it off? And the guy I was with turned kind of green and ran outside. And I'm thinking, okay. So I've had experience with putting things in my system, not liking it, and never going back ever again. There's never been an accident where I've drank sour milk again or eaten nightshade. But the booze was something different. And I liked it. I really, really did. And it defined my life for the next 20 years. Again, at 14, so freshman, sophomore high school, I didn't even have my driver's license. So it wasn't about drinking every day because I couldn't get it. But that'd be the only reason I couldn't. And my parents pretty much didn't drink at all with 7 boys, who could afford it even today. But once I turned 16, I got a job, and then I had my own money. And then in my mind, I had the right to do whatever I wanted to do with my own money, which was always, we were able to get beer. There's always some store on Capitol Hill we could get it. And I had already had practice in being a disappointment to my parents. And gosh, I don't know what I was thinking back then, but they wanted all their children to go to college. And to do that, they had to save money and do whatever parents have to do when you got 9 of them. And I was wasting my education, which we all went to a private school. And I got into with the drinking crowd, and my grades were just barely enough where they didn't kick me out, just barely. And I heard my whole life from grade school on, hey, Stephen, you have so much potential, so much potential. And I would thought, okay, well, I'll take that as a win. And can't believe the degree of immaturity I had in regards to what other people were doing to give me a better life. But what I didn't do was go to college. And I felt real good about that because I thought, okay, I've been screwing up my whole life. I'm not going to make my parents pay for college and then drink myself out of it. I'm just not going to do it. Then they had they had this thing in that year. I graduated in 1970, so they had this thing called Vietnam. And I thought, well, I'm going to probably get drafted. And I'm not so sure I would like Army life. And so with another friend of mine who's also in the program, just not here tonight, we did some serious talking with some serious drinking, and we joined the Marine Corps. Because the way I understood it from the recruiter is if you join the Marine Corps, which was a 4-year deal, they put you through a school, and then you may or may not get sent to Vietnam. If I wait for the draft, just like 10 weeks later, you're just cannon fodder or on the front line. That was my thinking at the time. So we ended up in the Marine Corps, and I couldn't believe it. Going into boot camp, And people are talking about, hey, you're not going to see daylight for the next 8 or 10 weeks. And I'm thinking, well, what about beer? What about drinking? Maybe, perhaps I've made a mistake. And so until I got sober, I think however long boot camp was, 8 or 10 weeks, that's the longest I've ever been in my life without a drink. And it's not because I didn't want one. But at any rate, a little bit more about that later. So there I was 18 years old in the Marine Corps, finished with boot camp, and the day comes where they read everybody's orders. And so, they're reading out your name and where you're going. And a lot of us infantry, just everything they have in the service. And they get to Private Meade, and the drill instructor stopped, and he's looking at his paper, and he's looking at me with a puzzled look on his face. And I'm thinking, what? What's the worst job? Because here it comes. And they put me in the military police. And all I could ever do was identify with the criminal. They put me in the military police. So, quick about that. The Marine Corps didn't have its own police school. So they sent us to an Army camp in Augusta, Georgia, Fort Gordon, and that's where the Army had all their intelligence and police programs. So they sent us there, and when I got there, I'd never been down south before, except Los Angeles, but never in the deep south, and got off the plane in Atlanta and on a bus from Atlanta to Augusta. And I'm just thinking, wow, the history this place must have. And I've got an opportunity to see it all. Just here's a chance to really make something of myself. So I get to bed, I think it was a Thursday where I got there. Friday, and they show you where you sleep and all that stuff. Friday, there's this buzzer, bell goes off for liberty, different in the Army than in the Marine Corps. And I'm looking, where's everybody going? And the people there said, well, there's a bus outside the front gate, takes you right to a whorehouse or into town. And I'm thinking, huh. And then, don't get ahead of me. Okay. Then I was also interested in the Army. They have this building called a day room, and they have ping pong tables, pool tables, and they had vending machines with 16-ounce ice cold Pabst Blue Ribbon beer for 10 cents. And I thought, huh, I never left the base. 10 cents. I mean, I liked the Army back in those days. So, stories about drinking in the service and all that, but from the military police school, there was a rumor that so there's a squad of us there, which was 12, that the top person in the squad got to pick where he was stationed out of the available picks. And any rate, so I graduated first in my class there for whatever reason. In San Diego, there's like 8 things to Vietnam, 1 to San Diego, 1 to some naval base in Florida. So I went back to San Diego, and where beer was more than 10 cents, it was a quarter there at the enlisted club. At any rate, so I spent my time in the military police, different incidences there where most of the time I got away with it. It always had to do with drinking, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Because now I'm 20, 21, 22, and I'm going to get out, which I did. And I thought, well, now I can go to college somehow. And in the meantime, not that this was an insignificant fact, but I also got married down there. And my daughter was born down there in 72. And in her room, the birthing room, I was there. Of course, my wife was there. and a couple of mutual friends, because my wife went to college down in San Diego, and we were smoking cigars and had a bottle of booze, and we're in the room where my daughter's, 6 hours old, and that's just how it was back then. And so I get out of the service, and I got enrolled at Bellevue Community College, and I got a part-time job as a grocery worker. And I'm trying to get my story together. Like, okay, how's this going to look? I'm going to go to school. I'm going to work the job, support the family and all that. I didn't particularly like the job, and I didn't particularly like school, but I did like the drinking. And we had some relatives shortly after I'd gotten out, and I'd already started at Bellevue Community College. And I was at this man who had just retired from the Army. He was a colonel, and he was a shirt tail relative of mine. And he said, what are you doing with your life? Because I just got out of the Marine Corps. And so I told him, and he said, you're going to Bellevue Community College. And he said, no, you're not. And I thought, well, yes, I am, sir. And he said, your mom and dad went to Seattle U. Your wife's mom and dad went to Seattle U. Your older brother and sister's gone to Seattle U. You're going to Seattle U. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, how's that going to work out? He said, be at my office tomorrow. He was the some kind of a director at Seattle U. Anyway, an hour after being in his office, I had a 4-year scholarship. I had to pay zero. It paid for books, everything. And it took really less than an hour for all the paperwork. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I drank my way out of there in 2 years. And I was really ashamed and really embarrassed. And I couldn't get rid of this feeling that I was just bringing shame on my family. And I'm not making enough money to really support my family. And I just don't know what I'm going to do, because it seemed like the rest of my life was going to be a long time. And so I ended up going to this party and ran into a guy that I'd never met before, but relatives are relatives. We knew the same people, a lot of the same people. And he was the type of drinker that I like to hang out with, like just right from the bottle, just pass it back and forth. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm a grocery clerk, and I'm at the time I said, I just left Seattle U because I got to work a little bit more. And he said, why don't you join up with me and make some real money? And I'm thinking, okay. I mean, he lived on Mercer Island, beautiful home. But by now I had 3 kids, and our kids were all the same age. And I said, okay. I said, well, tell me more about this money. And he said, come into business with me. I have a used car lot. And I laughed in his face. Used cars. My God, you got to be kidding. And he reached in his pocket, and he had that roll that'll choke a horse. And he said, that's just walking around money, Steve. And I thought, well, maybe used cars is okay. So that was it for me for the next 20 some years. And the drinking, again, he drank like I did, so that was great, except he made real smart decisions where I didn't, financial decisions. At any rate, I'm just thinking back now, and the times he begged me to invest with him in some different properties, and I was too smart for that. No, I'm okay. I'm okay. And now, of course, they're all worth millions, but at any rate. So then later on, I decided I'm gonna buy a house on Mercer Island. We were renting in Bellevue, and so I did. And we got a 5-bedroom home on a dead-end street, 2 blocks from where my kids were going to go to school. Well, I still remember the price. This was in 1981, and it was $68,000. And it was a good deal on the house at the time, but that's what it cost. And in 1981, interest rates were 16%, but whatever, it didn't matter to me. I just felt like I've kind of arrived because people with money live here, and I should have a lot more money than I do. I don't know where it's going. It's just disappearing. And then I wanted to do the right things, raise my family correctly. So got them enrolled at St. Monica's and knew some other parents there and tried to fit in. And St. Monica's had this deal. It's pretty cool. For new people in the parish, which we were, my wife and I, they hosted a dinner, and people in the parish would like pick a name out of a hat, and then they would make sure that family felt welcomed and all that. Just a fellowship deal. And so the day of that dinner, my wife's begging me not to drink. Don't drink. Just please don't drink today. So I'm thinking things aren't going real well at the Mead household in those days. And I said, okay, I won't. And so I didn't. And I'm just trying to see how far I'm going on this story. So as it turned out, Nancy picked my name out of the hat in 1981. And I kind of liked that. I kind of liked her. And then my life went from just barely keeping it together to just major problems in every single area of my life. In fact, Nancy was the last person I drank with. Not my last drink, but the last person I drank with. My last drink was in the parking lot outside the Bellevue Alano Club. I had 2 beers, and I thought, what if I go into this AA meeting and something happens, and then I don't drink anymore? Then this would be a waste. And I thought, I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to waste it. So that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife met me there because she had threatened to divorce me if I didn't go to AA a couple of years before that. And I was going to a meeting then, and I stopped at a bar, and I came back, and she's waiting to hear what my report was. And my report to her was, I went there, and a couple of men were kind of standing outside the door, and they told me it was full. And I said they were really nice, and they talked to me, just good, nice people. And they asked me all about my drinking, and they actually told me that, I'm on a slippery slope, and I better, watch it, take it easy. And she bought it 100%. And I'm just thinking, whew. A couple years later, when we get to 1986, and I really do go to AA, she had told her sister this story. Well, Stephen went before, but they were full, and her sister said, "No, yeah." So anyway, that was my introduction to AA, and I don't know to this day why I kept coming back. I didn't like it. I read the third tradition. The only requirement for membership is I didn't want to stop drinking. I wanted to figure out a way how to drink and stay out of trouble. And hanging out with what looked to me like, no offense, a bunch of losers. And they looked like such losers to me, and they were happy and laughing and stuff. So I thought they don't even know their position in life. But a man reached out his hand to me, and he said, can you not drink till tomorrow? And I thought, what a stupid question. I can not drink anytime I want. And he said, he lived on Mercer Island too, so I would talk to him. And he said, I'll pick you up tomorrow for another meeting. And as smart as I am, I didn't know people came back. I mean, I thought you went to AA and, something happened or it didn't. And he said, no, I've been come back for 3 years. 3 years. Jeez. So I don't know why, but I didn't drink, and I didn't drink the next day, and I didn't drink the next day. And I ended up going to a meeting every day. And at that time, there were a lot of people my age. So you kind of, I fell in with the group that would be the lowest common denominator, bad companionship. And we hung out always at the first step hall room, because what do we know about that other stuff? And eventually I was allowed to empty ashtrays, be a coffee maker, be a secretary. And 3 years went by and I wasn't getting better, but I couldn't tell anybody that because I have to be getting better. I'm going to AA every day. The rest of my life, the troubles just piled up and they were unsolvable. And I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was doing everything right in AA by my own thinking. I was going to meetings. I wasn't drinking. I was involved in, a position. And I wasn't getting well. And I was starting to get scared about myself. In the meantime, my wife had divorced me. If she thought it was fun to live with drinking, not drinking was another story. Then there was other issues that she didn't subscribe to from my behavior. So a turning point in my life in Alcoholics Anonymous was in August of '89. I had 3 years and I felt so good. I got that 3-year coin. And man, I'm telling my friends how good I should be, but I'm not inside. And somebody there asked me if I'd speak at the birthday meeting. And I can't tell you what it did to me. I felt like I had just been made king of the world. I don't remember if it was 10 or 20 minutes, but a birthday meeting, the people with birthdays would, get up and talk for 10 minutes. And there were a couple of things I didn't understand at the time. Although I'd been to plenty of speakers meetings, I've been to over 1,000 meetings in 3 years. That when you speak at the podium, when you're finished, everybody claps. It doesn't matter what you say, they still clap. And not only do they do that, at most speaker meetings, there'll be people there that got well in AA, and they'll say, "I liked what you had to say. Thank you." Because AA people are polite that way. So I get up there and I have my 10 minutes or whatever it is, and I'm thinking, boy, this is just the beginning. They're going to be asking for me citywide, statewide, national, just before I haven't even talked yet. I'm already wondering, I'm going to have to buy a suitcase, a carry-on for my new suit. Hey, little did I know that, almost 39 years later, I'd be talking at the convention. But anyway, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. So after the meeting, after I spoke and told everybody what they should be doing, everybody clapped. And I thought, God, it just feels good. I think I do want to be a speaker. And I turn away from the podium, and there's a few people that said, "Hey, I like what you had to say, thank you." And this is the best I ever felt in AA. And there's a guy kind of hanging back a little bit. Actually, a friend of Jeffrey's, as it turned out. And he said, "Steve, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, yeah, sure. I'm thinking, and he said, "I really listened to what you had to say." And I thought, as you should. And he said, "Do you mind if I make a comment?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You're insane." And you would think a person of my temperament would take offense at that. Here's a person I've never seen before in my life. And he just said, "You're insane." And what happened is I had a couple of projectile tears come out. I thought, he knows. And I said, yes. And then he has this kind of a cackle laugh. And he said, "And there's not a damn thing you can do about it, is there?" And I'm saying, no. And he said, do you want to get well? And I said, yes, I do. And I'm wondering, I've never heard of any talk like this ever in AA. And he said, a bunch of us are meeting in our basement. We're going through the big book, and the people that do that get well. And I'd never heard about that either. And I said, well, finally, I said, well, how much time do you have? And he said, very, quite proudly, he said, I've got 2 years. And I said, 2 years? I have 3. And he said, yeah, Steve, but I got well. And so that changed my life that night after that meeting. And yeah, I know this is being taped, so I'll be careful what I say, but then I got to meet Jeffrey, and he no longer had to be low man on the totem pole. I pushed him out of that slot. So we went through the book in a way I'd never heard before. We read what it said and discussed what it said. And we could tell if it applied to us or not. And I had never been to any meeting that had ever treated the literature of AA like that. And in fact, if I would have heard about it, I would have condemned it. What do you mean you're meeting with some other people at somebody's house? That's not right. That's not AA. And look what you're doing to your book. You're defacing it. I would have been against all that stuff just by default. And so as these workshops started, that was the phrase we used, as these workshops started, I ended up going to a different one almost every night. And I didn't want to go back to the regular AA meetings because people were getting well in front of me at these meetings. And of course, I got laughed at again and said, my job's going to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, not in somebody's basement workshop. So we started some meetings, and we started some meetings in Seattle that got real big for a long time. And as happens in AA, there's ebbs and flows, and meetings come and go. And that was my life in Alcoholics Anonymous for the first 17 years. I had a lot of amends to make, and I made a lot of amends. And I've got a lot of stories about amends too. But what happened in 2003, so I was about 17 years sober, I went into a depression, and I'd never been in one before, and I didn't know how to handle it. And it was taking me out. And my friends in AA would say, meaning well, go pray on it. Do some meditation. And I had been in 17 years, and I was able to say, oh, thank you very much. But inside, got nothing better than that. I just didn't know what to do. So I ended up, I broke my neck. And the physician, who also happened to be in AA and knew him well, he said it was a stress fracture. And I said, a stress fracture? He said, yeah, some people get heart attacks, some people get strokes. Yours landed in your neck. And he said, I have a prescription for you. And I said, okay, drugs weren't a part of my story, but I didn't care. I was so miserable. And in my mind, I should have been so well. I had sponsees and all that kind of stuff. So he wrote me a prescription to a psychiatrist. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And as happens in AA, she had an opening that day. And so I went to her office, and she had my medical folder, on her desk. So she, I guess, get to know me a little bit. And she said, I see that you're in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, are you active in it? And I try to be humble and say, well, yeah, sort of. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm there every day. I'm whatever. I'm secretary of this meeting and all that. Yeah, I know all about it. And she said, are you familiar with your book? And I said, yeah, basically, of course, I knew every page, every letter on every page, but I'm being humble and just saying, yeah, sort of. And she said, you know that part that says that you create your own misery? And I said, say what? And she said, the part that says we're certain that we create our own misery. And I said, yeah, I had a vague notion of where that was. And she said, it's true. And I'm thinking, what kind of psychiatrist on an opening? I only met her once. That's the only time I've ever been with her. And she said, my work's done with you. If you get that you're doing it to yourself, Alcoholics Anonymous, the program's giving you every step to take from here on. And I think I've never heard anybody having this kind of an experience. What about like 2 years seeing you every week or something like that? She said, you're doing it all to yourself. And so I couldn't see it. The situation in my life, I couldn't see where I was doing it to myself, but I'll tell you, I believed it. Maybe that's faith. I believed what she said. I believed what the book said, and I had no, if the right word is empirical evidence that it was true. I was innocent. I was a victim. And so next I did something else that I hadn't heard of anybody doing in AA, but I'm not saying that all sorts of people haven't done it. I just never heard of it. I hired a spiritual director. I found one and hired it because also in the book, I had read where spiritual principles would solve all your problems. And I had problems that you couldn't count. And I'm thinking, it's at the bottom of page 42. They make a statement to me that changed my life again. We discovered spiritual principles would solve all our problems. And I believed it, but I had no reason to believe it because, I was a good AA guy. I would have given myself a B plus because I'm too modest to give myself an A. But that's how I thought of myself in my program. So I got this spiritual director, and I gave her the shortest version I could of my troubles. And I said, I'm not interested in, did my dad spank me when I was bad, growing up? I want to know, how is this possible? What are these spiritual principles they're talking about? Are you familiar with them? And she said, yeah, that's my life. And so I got real interested in them. And I met with her twice a week for 6 months. And the reason I met with her twice a week is because she wouldn't let me meet her 3 times or 4 times a week. I didn't know how hungry I was for information that I didn't even know was available. I mean, I didn't even know that I didn't know it. And I was fascinated with it. And from that, I found at the time it was in Wisconsin, I found this spiritual entity, I guess you would call it. All they did was study spiritual principles. That was the whole study. And I got interested in that. And they had a 2-year program to go through all these courses, 100% spiritual principles. And I finished it in 18 months because I wanted to know about it. And then back at the AA meetings, I'm not saying really anything to anybody because I didn't want that look like, well, good for you, Steve. I hope you're happy. Get away from me. Quit talking to me. Quit talking to me about that stuff. So as a result of that, I looked at other spiritual practices, and I couldn't find a difference in how they worded their principles and how AA worded theirs. And I was afraid in the beginning that I would hear something contrary to Alcoholics Anonymous, and just the opposite happened. I found deeper understanding of principles in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I turned into a lawman. I believe in the laws. I believe that spiritual principles put to use in every circumstance and situation is the way to go. And I've had lots and lots of opportunities to practice that. A couple of quick stories about that. In whatever, 10 years ago or so, or maybe 12 years ago, I had a small construction company and I had a partner. And we were doing fine. In fact, one day, Nancy and I had just flown back from Maui that very day, and I was going to meet my partner, and we had a new job to start. And all the money was gone out of a joint account, which we had equal rights to it because we were both on it. But half of it was his, half of it was mine. Well, my $34,000 half was gone. Never seen him since. And I was in a murderous rage. My whole life was gone. This money meant a lot to me. What I was going to do, how I was going to live the rest of my life. And the best I could get to was, well, I'll try to make this even shorter. My plan was, his wife taught high school down south. I was going to go to her classroom and knock on the door and say, do you know your husband's a thief? I just thought that would be a pretty cool thing to do. I called somebody and I was asked, do you really believe that the spiritual principles will solve all your problems? And I'm saying, yeah, but this is money. And I was told, here's a way to look at it. Never was it look at it this way. It's just, here's a way you could look at it. And I said, okay, what? And you can look at it this way. You don't have that money right now because you don't need it. And I said, say what? Who ever heard of that? I said, tell me that again. Well, Steve, you don't have that money right now because you don't need it. That's what the universe is telling you. And I was so angry and I had such rage in me that I thought, you know what? I'm going to give that a try. The ups and downs, the back and forth I've had my whole life. What if it was true? So I was introduced to a way of forgiveness that I'd never heard before, because I found it's real easy to talk about forgiveness when it's not about coming out of your pocketbook. And as a result of that, and it took me a while, because I didn't want to pretend I didn't hate. I wanted to not hate. And I was told, no, it goes way farther than that, Steve. It's not about not hating, it's about loving. And there's more than I could handle. I didn't have nearly that spiritual maturity. So I started going up to Whidbey Island. We had some family property up there and stuff. And I got involved in the AA community up there. I'd go up like Thursday through Sunday. And as it turns out, I know lifelong friends from that community up there and still have them. I ended up living up there for almost 3 years, for 33 months. And I'm trying to explain a domino effect from taking a direction. So many all good things happen to me as a result of following some directions that I never, ever would have thought possible. Then, boy, time goes fast, so I'll finish up. And here's a story I ended with up at the convention. Oh, I shouldn't just say convention, international convention. After my humility pill. Lara wasn't at the meeting that I spoke at, but I told her if she ever gets the tape, she'll know I gave her credit. Because I said that the International Committee asked Lara, do they know somebody that can talk about selfishness? And she put my name in. Okay, so in 2006, through this 2-year program, remember that I finished in 18 months, that I went through, I didn't know it at the time, but you could become an ordained minister through their program. I had no interest in it because I was Catholic. And what would my mom say if she ever found out I was, at any rate, no thanks. So the director of that program called me and he said, hey, I've monitored your work and I just got a favor to ask you. And I said, what? I just said, I don't have any interest in ordination or any of that stuff. And he said, why don't you ask your higher power what you should do? And I thought, well, that's a sneaky guy. So I flew back to Wisconsin and we had a week there of different stuff and got ordained. And it's 2006. And we had an ice storm that year in January, February. It was maybe as cold as it's ever been on record, but it was cold for a long time. And this homeless guy used to come to my front porch every day for years. And he was very familiar in the AA meetings around there because they'd kick him out regularly. He stunk of urine, and he was homeless before it was fashionable. Because this is a long time ago. And he knocked on the door one night and he said, could he sleep on my living room floor? And I said, yes. It was freezing out. But in my mind, I'm thinking, hell no, you bum, get out of here. I don't want you on my floor. I don't want you in my house. But what I said was yes. Then the next night, same thing happened. And I couldn't believe how disgusted I was, not of myself, but that he was in my home. And I had a gas fireplace, so he could just lay down. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't even ask to use the bathroom because the first morning I get up, he's peeing off the deck, in front of the neighbors and all that. So then the third night came and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't have him in my house. So I snuck in my own house in the back door, went upstairs to bed without turning on any lights. And I'm thinking, I fooled him. And I hear him pounding on the door. But anyway, that's where I was spiritually. I did nothing. The next morning, the police knock on the door. He had frozen to death outside. And that did something to me. I'm thinking, here I am, a longtime AA person. I'm an ordained minister. I talk like I want to help people. And he froze to death. So I still have work to do. And I want to end just with this. I ran across this a while ago and I really liked it. And it says, what could you want sobriety cannot give? Do you want peace? Sobriety offers it. Do you want happiness? A quiet mind, a certainty of purpose, and a sense of worth that transcends the world? Sobriety offers you this. Do you want care and safety and the warmth of sure protection always? Do you want a quietness that cannot be disturbed, a gentleness that can never be hurt, a deep and abiding sense of well-being that can never be threatened? All this sobriety offers you and more. What could you want sobriety cannot give? Why would you seek for an answer to your problems other than the answer that will answer each and every one of them? I mentioned this earlier, but on page 42 of our big book, we read where the authors shared that they discovered that spiritual principles would solve all our problems. Are we to understand that sobriety actually offers us a sane mind, a way of living where kindness is our default response to all circumstances and situations? And what else might sobriety offer? How about a life of happiness, joyousness, and freedom? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.